Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Nazir, pages 13 through 19. Yud Gimel through Yud Tet. 13. Hareini Nazir. Behold, a person says, I am a Nazir. L'cheshayi li ben, when I have a son. V'shama chavero, v'yomer alai. And his friend who was standing next to him said, and upon me too. Mahu. So what's the law? Obviously the person who made the vow, he'll have to become a Nazir when he has a son. But the friend, when does that guy become a Nazir? Adibure mashma wa gufe mashma? Is he referring to when his friend, the original vower, has a son, or when he himself has a son? It's not entirely clear. So the Gemara asks this question and doesn't come to a resolution. Teiku, leaves it standing. Daf Yud Dalet, 14. Nazir shekalu lo yamav. If a Nazir fulfilled his term of service, however, he did not yet bring his sacrificial offerings to conclude the term of service, Loke al hatuma, he can still be subject to corporal punishment for violating the tumah laws of contracting corpse impurity. However, he will not receive corporal punishment for violating the rules of haircuts, or for that matter of drinking wine. Why? Because he's done the amount of time he needed to do in fulfillment of those rules. Tetvav, 15. Hakoveret meto, shloshi amim, kodam laregel. What happens if you bury your dead relative within 3 days of an upcoming festival? Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Shlosh Regalim. But the minhag gezeret shiva. So, having observed partial shiva, rites of mourning for the deceased, of at least 3 days, or getting into the third day, then the decree of shiva is over. You don't have to observe the rest of it. Shmona yamim, if you got to the 8th day, so the shiva is over, now we're into the next phase, which is the shloshim, then batam and exer shloshim. He doesn't have to fulfill the rest of the shloshim. It's over. Umutul saper erva regel, and he's allowed to take a haircut on the eve of the festival. On the day of Erev Yom Tov, this guy is allowed to take a haircut. Now, this is what the Gemara says. However, the Gemara elsewhere has another opinion, another shita, that says that the gezerah of the shiva is going to be waived even if 1 day of the shiva is observed. And in fact, that is the halacha as it is recorded in Shulchan Aruch. So if you observe even the slightest bit of the shiva before a Yom Tov, it's over. And the Yom Tov, you move on in life. Next stuff. Tet Zayin, 16. Misha Nadar Nizirut. What happens if a person made a vow of Nizirut, but they do so while physically standing in a cemetery? It's a kind of a peculiar thing. Even if he was there for 30 days. Those days do not count in the fulfillment of his obligation. However, he also does not bring a sacrifice for having contracted impurity. Why? Because he already was impure at the start and never left the cemetery. Yatsa, however, if he walks out, v'nichnas, and when it goes back in, then those days will count for his fulfillment of his term, or maybe korban tumah, and he'll have to bring a sacrifice corresponding to his impurity. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, lo bo bayom. Not on that very day. If he goes out and comes back in on the same day, then there will be no sacrifice, because Shene'emar, as it says in Torah, the earlier days will fall away until he has earlier days. But if he never had any days which were counted in his favor for the fulfillment of his term, then the laws of purification or the sacrifices associated with it will not have to be brought yet. Yud Zayin, 17. Boy Rava. Rava asked the following question. Nazir b'veis hakvaros. What happens if a person was a Nazir and they're in the cemetery now? Boy shiel malchus olo. Do they have to dilly-dally? Do they have to loiter in the cemetery in order to be subject to malchus, to corporal punishment, or not? Meaning, even the split second that they're guilty of being there, they're obligated in receiving malchus. So, well, what's the scenario exactly? I mean, how do you enter into a cemetery and have the question even come up? The answer is if upon entering, the Nazir was protected from contracting impurity by being in some kind of a box, in some kind of a contraption, a shida teva o migdal, some ark or some closet, so that as long as he's encased in the closet, he doesn't contract impurity. But what happened? His friend came along and removed one of the panels, and now the tumah is extending into the ma'aziva, into the closet. So the question is, the guy entered through no fault into this place of tumah, and was protected, and through no fault of his own now is exposed, is he going to be punished just for having that happen, or only if he lingers there some length of time? There is a law about lingering in the Beis HaMikdash, and then being obligated subject to punishment, whereas if you left immediately in a fluke case, you were not subject to punishment. So the question is, does the law of Shehiyah apply here as well, or only in the case of the Mikdash? And the Gemara answers, Ki Gamrinan Shehiyah Beis HaMikdash El Barai Lo Odima Lo Shna. And the answer is Teku. We're not sure. We're not sure whether the laws of the temple and Shehiyah apply here or they don't apply here. We left it unresolved. 18. Yudchet. Ein bein tamesh and nazar. There's no difference between an impure person who became a nazir, the nazir Torah shenitba, to a nazir who was pure who became impure. Ela shetamesh and nazir, except for the fact that a person who was impure who declares himself a nazir, shvi shelo min minyan, the seventh day of that person's purification can now count as the first day of their term of service as a nazir. Nazir Torah shenitba, however, if a person was a nazir who was pure who became impure, and shvi shelo min minyan, his seventh day will not be reckoned in his favor when he tries to complete his term. Yudtet 19. Rabbi Elazar HaKaper b'Ribbi Omer. What is the meaning of the following verse? And he shall atone for that which he sinned against his soul. And this is a reference to a nazir. What did this guy do wrong? The only thing he did wrong was he afflicted himself by not allowing himself, by way of a neder, to drink wine, to indulge in the enjoyment of wine. So if a person who only abstained from wine is called a sinner, a person who abstains from any and all enjoyment in this world, all the more so that we will reckon them as a choteh. So this is a comment in the Talmud, which is a fiery cry against radical asceticism. We don't want a person to deny themselves the enjoyments of the olam hazeh, of this world. If a nazir would just abstain from one thing is bad enough as a choteh, then all the more so if you're going to abstain from everything. So within reason, people should enjoy the pleasures of the olam hazeh. Everyone have a great week.